right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we got a big one for you. We are talking about Francis Ford Coppola's Megalopolis, his passion project that's been in the works for 30-something years. And it came out and nobody knows what to do with it. But we're going to talk about it. And joining me is Josh Bell from Awesome Movie Year. We get into a lot of great puzzle pieces. Very fun conversation coming up. So before we get to it, I do want to remind you, as always, to make sure you are subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And don't forget to join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show, and where I'm sure there's a lot of people who love Megalopolis and a lot of the movies we're about to talk about that are other famous failures throughout movie history. So come join us. It's a very fun place to talk movies. And with that said, let's get into Megalopolis. All right, Josh Bell is back with us to try to figure out Megalopolis. How's it going, Josh?
I don't know. Megalopolis has rocked every assumption that I've ever had about life and humanity. So who's to say, really?
I think that's what he wanted, quite frankly. But
Yeah.
normally I would, have you on an episode for a movie that you, genuinely liked a lot, But I did think after running into you in the parking garage after our screening here in Las Vegas, where we did get to have the person talking to the screen. So that's very exciting. We could talk about that later. But I did think when we talked about Francis Ford Coppola on Awesome Movie Year for box office flop The Cotton Club, this would kind of bookend that quite well with where he's at right now.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, he's known for some of the greatest films of all time, and also for some of the biggest failures of all time, not just The Cotton Club leading up to this. So
Yeah.
even though I think he's getting a lot of attention for this movie with the idea that it was this big swing and he really went for it and it's a failure, but you have to kind of admire that. He's done that before. That whole narrative has existed multiple times in his career, including the idea of him putting his own finances on the line to make the movie, to get the movie made and then failing. So I feel like when you talk about Francis Ford Coppola, greatest films of all time and biggest boondoggles of all time are like even, at even levels almost with him.
Absolutely. And I think that is somewhat exciting.
Yeah.
That's definitely part of, what's to love here, even if the movie itself, let's just say, has some flaws. But I think that is absolutely right. And his, his legacy, it's what he wants, I feel like, out of this, is to just make movies that people, either talk about or maybe are a little baffled by, but, want to continue to talk about and figure out over the years. And I think even a lot of his flops, are things that people continue to discuss and maybe reassess. And, they stay in the consciousness, at least of film nerds, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, and I think if you look at that generation of like the film school brats or whatever, his peers who we may bring up some later, he's the only one who is still in this position where he's taking these enormous risks and is out there and is not either like a sort of very establishment part of the system or completely like out of the conversation entirely. So he's got this unique position among all of those peers of his, which is impressive.
Absolutely. Well, let's start getting into some puzzle pieces. I think they will be all over the place today, but what do you got for your first one?
Well, I might as well start with a movie that goes to what I was just talking about, a Coppola movie, One from the Heart, which is another very, very famous Coppola flop and a movie that he also famously put his fortune on the line at a time when he had far less of a fortune. He basically mortgaged, his American Zoetrope studio, this facility that he had built himself that he thought was the future of filmmaking. And he put that on the line to kind of prove that that was the case with this movie. And because it was such a huge failure, he spent, I think, like decades trying to just financially get himself out of the hole and making some of these anonymous seeming studio films, from that period. But not only that, in a sort of meta sense, right? That's was the conversation around that movie. But I think the way that that movie is made, which is that's a movie that takes place in Las Vegas, but not any of it was shot in Las Vegas. And they built this entire artificial version of Vegas at the American Zoetrope Studios. And
Mm.
so the movie basically takes place in this sort of mythical version of Las Vegas. And one of the reasons I really like this movie as a Vegas movie, even though they didn't shoot it here, is that it creates something that's like more Vegas than Vegas. All of these
Right,
things that
right.
in reality are not next to each other, are not all sort of juxtaposed in this way. He puts them there and gives you every sort of imaginary thing about Vegas that you would think of in the setting of this movie. And so I really like, I haven't seen the new recut. And that's the other thing about Coppola. Of course, he always recuts his films.
Sure.
So I
Yeah.
haven't seen that version, but I've seen the original a couple times and really enjoyed it. And I think that's what he's doing with New York or New Rome in this
Sure.
movie, is that, yes, it's a combination of New York and Rome, but what it really is this sort of heightened version of New York, is this version that gives you every kind of idea about New York that people might have if they don't live in New York. And none of it, I think, aside from maybe a few like establishing or montage shots, some of which I think were actually done during the 2001 attempt at making this movie that actually ended up in the film. Um,
Probably.
but other than that, all of it was shot on sound stages in Georgia and not in New York. And so again, it's this recreation of a city outside of the city itself as a way to sort of capture the essence of it.
Sure, and I think that that is such a more exciting way to use the magic of movies than somebody like, I don't know, like a Zemeckis or someone who's using technology to do all these things that they're unreal, but they're not even like grounded in anything. Whereas this is a more magical version of, like you said, New York, or with One from the Heart, Las Vegas, and that even if the movie doesn't work out, like it is still like an interesting idea.
Yeah, I mean, and I think people like Zemeckis are trying so hard with their technology to make something that fools the audience into believing it's real. And that
Hmm.
often looks really, really dated very soon after. Whereas with these movies, I don't think Coppola is doing that at all. If you say, oh, this looks artificial, he would say, yeah, of course it looks artificial. It is artificial. It's a movie. It's
Yeah,
magic. And you don't watch One from the Heart thinking, oh, this looks like they really shot it in Las Vegas. It doesn't. And in
sure.
fact, the final shot of One from the Heart is the camera pulling back to show you that it's in a studio.
Hmm.
And I think that's the same thing here, even though these are, green screens or whatever they are and not fully built sets. You're not thinking, oh, this is the real streets of New York or whatever. Of
Yeah.
course you're not, and you're not meant to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will go to the first thing that I thought of while I was sitting there in the theater and watching this movie unfold in front of me, and that is Mike Judge's Idiocracy, a movie about a future society in which everything is just as stupid as can be. And I think Francis Ford Coppola knew that that's like what he was doing, but I think that he was trying to kind of balance it with like a heft and a dramatic weight to it all, instead of just going straight up, ridiculous. But it is all there. The overblown politics, the division, the society just obsessed with their media and just giving into their, most base desires and all that kind of stuff. And I think that all of that is present here in Megalopolis. And honestly, that excess is going to, filter into a few of my other puzzle pieces down the line here. But excess and the way that we're just kind of doomed to head in that direction, Mike Judge tackles it in, a much more, overtly funny way, whereas Megalopolis, depending on who you ask, it's funny or it's inadvertently funny. But I think that it's definitely dealing with some of the same ideas of where we're headed.
Yeah, I wonder, like in Idiocracy, basically everyone except Luke Wilson's character who's traveled from the past is meant to be an idiot, I think,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And here I think, yes, it gets at that, especially the like media obsession, right? We've got Wow Platinum, the
Mm,
whatever, like entertainment reporter or finance reporter. It's not clear what her profession exactly is, but she's
sure.
obviously meant to be this sort of media personality, and then the singer whose virginity is being auctioned off, her as
Mhm.
well. But I think that Coppola means for you to regard like Caesar Catalina, the Adam Driver character, and the mayor, Giancarlo Esposito's character, who is like his enemy, as intelligent, like crafty,
Right.
players or whatever, not as idiots.
Absolutely. I think it's a little bit of like having your cake and eating it too. Like he wants all this dramatic heft for those characters, but then they're surrounded by a lot of stupidity.
Yes, that is true. I mean, and you've got like Shia LaBeouf's character, who is the example, I would say, of like the stupid person who thinks that he's smart kind of thing.
Sure.
And I think that is sort of what they're doing here, maybe.
Absolutely. Well, what do you got for your next piece?
So I'm going to go to one of those Coppola peers that I mentioned, George Lucas, and mention Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, which is another movie in which this huge figure of 1970s cinema, who has a lot of money. George Lucas probably has more money than Francis Ford Coppola does. And,
I would think.
Either way, insanely rich, has the freedom to do anything that he wants, and comes up with this really garish, often incredibly fake looking spectacle that is all about guys arguing over taxes,
Yeah. Is that where they introduced midichlorians? Is that?
I don't know if it was in that one or it was in the second one, but I mean, it was certainly in that trilogy. I mean, you could talk about that whole trilogy, but it seemed like as it went on, especially by the time you got to the third one, Lucas was a bit aware of like, okay, we need to have Star Wars-y stuff.
Got to rein this in a little bit.
Right. And I mean, I think all of those movies are kind of failures in their own ways, but especially the first one, from the opening crawl, and it's like the Trade Federation was arguing over tariffs, and people sitting in the theater like, what did we get into here? What is this Star Wars movie? And it's clearly like, this is what Lucas was thinking about for all those years. What do I want to do with my Star Wars prequel? And of course, now we have Star Wars all the time, but at that time, it had been decades since there had been, or almost 2 decades since there had been a Star Wars movie. And here was what Lucas had been kind of ruminating on, much like Coppola had. And this is what he thought was fascinating. And it is very much a movie made by a very rich person who is very out of touch with reality and has complete freedom to do anything that he wants, and lots of special effects that do not look at all convincing anymore. And even then we're a little shaky. So Lucas and Coppola, of course, friends for decades as well. And it wouldn't surprise me. I know at one time Lucas talked about how he wanted like Steven Spielberg or I think Ron Howard to direct later movies in the trilogy. And I don't know if Coppola was ever offered that, but it's not an inconceivable idea.
Yeah, I think it could possibly work out a little like this, but it's wild to think of other like beloved, series that come back after a long time. And it's like, what did the creator think of? Let's throw politics into it. Like, what if Sam Raimi came back to Evil Dead, or Cameron came back to Terminator or something? Like, let's discuss all the politics in that world. It's like, what?
Right. And I think it really comes out of, and that's what people talk about with Megalopolis, like someone who has been so rich for so long that they don't really understand like what normal people think about. And in a way, that's what makes it fascinating, right? Because the vast majority of us are never going to be in that mindset. We're not going to get there.
That's absolutely a great point. I'm going to go with a combination of two awesome movie year movies for my next piece here. First of all, they're both from 1969, actually, the season that we're currently doing. The first one is Fellini's Satyricon, which we recently did. A movie that, again, talking about like society on the brink of collapse. This is, these biblical times instead of ancient Rome, mixed with current America in Megalopolis, but certainly using a similar blueprint there of looking back at the past to look at the future, or in the case of Satyricon, looking at this basically world that doesn't exist, but it's kind of unique in that way. Mixed with, spoiler alert for Awesome Movie Year, but a movie we're about to talk about at the time of this recording, The Bed-Sitting Room, a very strange British comedy, which also is set at, the aftermath of everything kind of falling apart, and deals with the more like absurd and just kind of nonsense elements of how
human beings would deal with that kind of situation. And I think, like I was saying with Idiocracy, it's kind of a little of both the weighty stuff with the Adam Driver character and all that, and then just the kind of silly, ridiculous stuff and the absurdist stuff with things like WoW Platinum and all that. I think that both of those movies, they kind of get into a lot of similar things about where people could potentially be headed, given some of the worst case scenarios.
Yeah, I think with Satyricon, it's very explicitly meant to be set in ancient Rome. But as you said, and as I think we talked about in our episode, it doesn't look at all like ancient Rome. It's not making any efforts to be historically accurate. And
Right.
clearly, Fellini is filtering ancient Rome through what was going on in the world in 1969. And it's less explicit in that it's not like a literal combination of ancient Rome with a modern city of that era like Megalopolis is, but it's definitely using it as a way to reflect like, here's the decadence of that period and how can we connect it to the decadence of our current era. And they're certainly doing a similar kind of thing and are similarly baffling.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Have you watched The Bed Sitting Room yet? At the time of recording, we're going to be talking about it this coming weekend.
No, I have not watched it yet. I will be watching it before our episode, of course. But who knows, which will probably be out before this, or I don't even know. But if you've listened to that episode or are about to listen to it, be assured I watched the movie.
Yes, absolutely. Josh always does his homework. Let's go to your next piece.
So my next piece is a movie that we kind of mentioned in our post-mortem there in the parking garage. And that at the time I thought to myself, no one is going to think of this. But subsequently, many, many, many people on Letterboxd have referenced Las Vegas's own Neil Breen and his film Fateful Findings. And if you don't know who Neil Breen is basically like, what if the Francis Ford Coppola of Megalopolis, instead of having $120 million, had like $100? And although Neil Breen has more than $100, I mean, the thing about him is that he's wealthy in a more normal sense, I think, and is able to finance these very, very, very low budget movies himself. But like Coppola, he has some out there ideas and the same kind of grandiosity that we get in Megalopolis, and the same kind of idea of like, I am the one who knows the secrets about the universe attitude. And Coppola isn't in this movie, of course, and he's not an actor, but you can tell that Adam Driver's character is very much a stand-in for Coppola himself, with his grand artistic vision that no one else understands and no one is willing to finance, but he's right, God damn it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in Neil Breen movies, and in Fateful Findings specifically, he always casts himself as that figure. He is the misunderstood one. He is the savior of humanity. He is the only one who understands the secrets of the universe, which no one can understand even when they are presented to you in the movie, because the movies make no sense, but they are absolutely the product of a guy who knows exactly what he wants, is paying everyone around him to make it happen, and does not care if you understand it or not.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing about these kind of movies that are, I don't want to say so bad it's good, but like, that get that reputation, is that person behind it, they have to believe in themselves 100%, or it's just not going to work whatsoever. I don't know how, but I have not seen any Neil Breen movies.
I don't know how, as a huge Tommy Wiseau fan, you can have not watched a Neil Breen movie.
I know. It's just this rabbit hole I'm eventually going to have to go down, and that'll probably be the one I start with. But I cannot wait. And since we're talking about Tommy Wiseau, as a little mini puzzle piece here. So like I mentioned at the top of the episode, Josh and I got to see a screening where they actually had hired somebody to do the sequence during the press conference scene after a big destruction event happened, where somebody in the audience asks a question and Adam Driver responds to him, and it added nothing to the movie.
Yeah,
but
it's so useless.
Pointless, totally pointless. But what it did is allow me to bring up The Room as a puzzle piece, because in the fan screenings where everybody has come up with all these little, bits, kind of like Rocky Horror screenings over the years, there's this one sequence towards the end during the birthday party scene where, for some reason, Tommy Wiseau, he like acknowledges the bottom right corner of the screen. And it's like, obviously, he's just not looking at the right spot on the camera, but somebody in the audience always runs down there and waves up at him. And then as soon as he looks down and he nods his head at him, the whole audience just like erupts in applause. And so that moment right there, just a little mini puzzle piece I had to include on the list.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure Rocky Horror has similar kinds of things where it's not just yelling to the screen, but a kind of a call and response aspect to it as well. And
Yeah.
I wonder if Megalopolis could someday prove to be a similar kind of phenomenon. I feel like too many people who like it want it, like actually revere it, and maybe wouldn't want to be yelling things at it to make fun of it. But it is so ridiculous that I could imagine that happening. Although it's hard. I mean, The Room is 20 plus years old now, and I don't know that there's been another movie since then that's come along with that level of enthusiasm for responding to it, that has that kind of audience response. I feel like people were trying to make that happen with Cats, and it did not work.
Yeah, it didn't quite work. But, also a fun, bad movie. But let's go on to another piece. What do you got?
So my next piece, I was hoping, because really this piece should be The Fountainhead, the 1940s movie based on Ayn Rand's very, very famous novel, which is about an architect in New York who has very, very specific ideas for the way that things should be designed and is being thwarted by the system, but is a great man and knows what's right. But I haven't seen that. So I feel like, and thought I might try to watch it before this, but I didn't have a chance to. So I feel like I can't legitimately include that, even though the story, like the basic plot of it, is very well known. And I haven't read the book either, but all of that is very well known. And I'm sure that was in Coppola's mind. What I have seen, however, is the right-wing funded trilogy based on Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged, which along the lines of Neil Breen movies has a higher budget than Neil Breen movies and some shockingly well-known, well-regarded actors, but is definitely made by people who don't really know about making movies and mostly just know about political commentary, and is made with the perspective of, we, via Ayn Rand, know what is true, what is real, and we're going to tell all you idiots about it. And is bafflingly bad. And the other thing, it's a trilogy based on one novel that they divided into 3 parts, but for budgetary reasons, each one has an entirely different cast. So all of the characters are played by different people each time. And it is totally baffling. By the time they get to the 3rd one, John Galt, who is the mysterious savior figure, kind of finally makes his presence known. And there's some weird sex scenes with him and the main character that maybe remind me a bit of the awkwardness of WoW Platinum and Shia LaBeouf. So, I mean, I'm sure on the one hand, Coppola would refute all of the right-wing following of Ayn Rand. On the other hand, it's very clear that her central idea of the great man and the genius who knows what's best for everyone is infused in this film.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it's not too far of a stretch to look at, people like Trump as, blueprints for some of these characters here. Even Elon Musk, it feels like there's a pretty strong connection to this main character in Megalopolis. But yeah, I haven't seen those Atlas Shrugged movies.
Shouldn't.
I'm sure
Definitely don't.
They're terrible. I do look forward to using Megalopolis as a puzzle piece if Zack Snyder ever gets to make his Fountainhead movie. So, yeah.
Yeah, it would. And I think that 40s version of the Fountainhead I believe it's with Gary Cooper, is, certainly a more well-regarded film than those right-wing Atlas Shrugged movies, which I went to the premiere of one of them here in Las Vegas to review it.
Leave it to Las Vegas.
Yeah.
I will go to Southland Tales for my next piece here. Another movie that people have been bringing up in conversation with this all over the place, but I think it's definitely there. It feels like As much as that movie was, at first considered this kind of disaster after the promise that Richard Kelly showed, and it's been reclaimed by a lot of people who think that it's actually great and kind of the work of a mad genius in a way. It's absolutely baffling. This, again, America on the brink of collapse. It stars Sarah Michelle Gellar, Seann William Scott, and The Rock. And it involves celebrities and politicians and all the things that we think of when we think of modern day America, just kind of mashed together into this crazy story that's very, very difficult to follow. And that's not to say that Francis Ford Coppola thought Megalopolis would be hard to follow. Like, that's why he made the movie or anything like that. But at the same time, I think that they're both grappling with the exact same ideas that are kind of like impossible to deal with. And that's probably why they kind of crumble under the weight of just how big of a project it is. But, like we said, it's fun to see someone take big swings like these.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought this up because, as you said, a lot of people have mentioned it and I put it on my list, but it's been so long since I saw it that I didn't remember a lot of details about it. So I was reluctant to kind of throw it in there just because other people have mentioned it. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting too, because we see, I mean, Coppola is 85 now, right? And he's taking this huge, huge swing with all the money he's made. But Richard Kelly, that was his second film, I believe.
I think
right?
so. Yeah.
Yeah. So already just taking the goodwill from Donnie Darko, from one movie that had been a success, and just fully going for it like that. I mean, I do appreciate that too. And it's a shame. I think I like The Box, which was the next movie that he made. I think that's an underrated one, but that was a long time ago. And he's really, I don't know if he's been unable to get financing or if he just got fed up with people, not understanding his work or whatever it is, but he hasn't done anything since then. And I think it's too bad. Whereas, Richard Kelly's Megalopolis, I guess, is Southland Tales, but let him keep going. Let him do his One from the Heart. Let him do his Cotton Club. Like, make it happen.
Yeah, it's weird too, like, because I mean, obviously his big hit out the gate with Donnie Darko is weird as hell too. And it's like, how weird just doesn't always connect, even though, people do like weird, but it just, sometimes it works, sometimes it just doesn't.
Right. I think speaking of that is a good segue into my pick of the Wachowskis' Jupiter Ascending.
Oh God, yeah.
And they're also right. Their early work, certainly weird. The Matrix, weird. Bound, weird. But those movies connect in a huge way. I mean, obviously, The Matrix is still one of the most popular movies of all time.
Absolutely.
And massively, massively connects with audiences. And they definitely use that success and goodwill from The Matrix. I mean, and they used it a lot, right? They used it in the Matrix sequels, which are certainly those kinds of sequels where they're doubling down in a way on, like, we're gonna fuck with the people who liked the first movie. And especially The Matrix Resurrections, which, only Lana was involved with, but still is even more so a movie where it was like, oh, Warner Brothers, you want a Matrix movie? How about this? Choke on this.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, Jupiter Ascending, which is terrible to be clear. I think, and I don't know, like I think all of these movies that were like Neil Breen, like Southland Tales, like Megalopolis, has its passionate defenders. And when you do something this weird, I think you're gonna end up with that no matter what. I think Jupiter Ascending is terrible. But it's definitely the Wachowskis kind of pushing, like, we still have this goodwill for some reason. We still have this money that we can access. Let's launch. And the other thing about that movie that this is not with Megalopolis is clearly meant to launch some kind of universe that never went anywhere because it was a huge failure. But you watch that movie and, you've got Channing Tatum as like the dog man and
amazing
Eddie Redmayne, just the absolute worst performance. And that just unbelievably terrible in that movie. But again, doing something so distinctive that that the Wachowskis were like, do this. And you wonder, why is he doing that? So I can't say that I like it, but I guarantee you someone who listens to this, one of your Facebook group guys, is going to say, no, Jupiter Ascending is brilliant.
Yeah, it's incredible movie. I think you could do an entire, like you mentioned The Matrix and, you mentioned Bound in there. You could do an entire Wachowski puzzle piece here because, there's, I think, a lot. You could throw Speed Racer in there too. I think with the Matrix sequels, especially, and connecting those with Southland Tales and then Southland Tales back to Megalopolis. These movies that just kind of they kind of claim to have the secrets, you know what I mean, of just the world. And like, you either like fascinated by that or you're just like, what are these people on about? You know? And yeah, I think that Jupiter Ascending is oh my God, it's a fascinating disaster, but yeah, not the brightest spot in the Wachowski filmography, but it sure is wild. Yeah. I will combine a couple puzzle pieces for really my last full one here, but I'm going to go with both Babylon, which is another movie that a lot of people have talked about in conversation with this movie, and Spring Breakers, the Harmony Korine film, both for the same reason, excess. You know, this is society at its most excessive. Spring Breakers is basically where we are now. Babylon is basically where were then. Megalopolis is where we will be if we continue down this line. And I think that you can really draw a straight line between the three. And you know I'm a big defender of Babylon. Babylon, Hive, Rise Up, and I love Spring Breakers, of course. But yeah, I know that they're all very polarizing movies, which makes sense why Megalopolis would be too.
Yeah, I don't like either of those movies at all. And I mean, there are parts of Babylon that I thought were good, but in a way I found it worse because it was the good parts were smothered by what I thought were the terrible parts. And I was like, why didn't he just make an interesting movie about the silent movie era? Why did he have to do all of this nonsense, you know, to sort of sideline it? But that's a whole other conversation. But certainly you're right. And I feel like Babylon, in a way, it connects really well with Southland Tales because, like Richard Kelly, Damien Chazelle had made, I mean, not one movie, but like one really, really big hit movie, you know, which I think was his second film, La La Land, and used all that goodwill to be like, here's my crazy ass project. Or I guess this came after he did First Man as well. So, which was also successful. And it's weird because First Man I think is a good movie, but is certainly in that conventional, like, biopic about important historical figure kind of mode. But still, he's early in his career, and he's talked about how the failure of Babylon means he's not getting more things made, right?
Yeah.
He's not able to, he's in director's jail or whatever. He's not able to get financing, and I'm sure he'll get something going at some point. But, yeah, I think those connect, whereas those are filmmakers who are much younger and much earlier in their careers than Francis Ford Coppola is at this point, but are putting that out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I hadn't even thought about it when I put it on the list, but Harmony Korine really kind of doing the Francis Ford Coppola thing of like self-funding, and if people watch it, great. If they don't, I'm very happy about that too.
Right. I mean, even more so, Spring Breakers is like the most conventional Harmony Korine film, I think. And, you know, his recent like AI fueled, I know you liked Aggro Drift, and I'm sure you'll see not Baby Geniuses.
Baby Invasion.
There you go. Yeah. At some point, whenever you can. But I mean, those are even, I think Francis Ford Coppola would look at those and be like, whoa, hey, buddy, that's a little too much.
What he has given birth to in the world of filmmaking. What do you got next, Josh?
So I feel like, in deference to Coppola himself, we're naming all of these modern movies, and I'm sure he would say that he wasn't influenced by any of those movies, that he was influenced by classic films. And so I want to bring up Fritz Lang's Metropolis, which clearly is an influence on Megalopolis, title on down, is a, you know, one of the most famous films of the silent era, is about this futuristic city and the battles between people with different visions from different classes, and is a marvel of production design and costume design and all of that, and is brilliant and is easier to follow, I think, than Megalopolis. Even in the versions where like parts of it were cut out because they couldn't find them for a long time, you can still really follow the plot of that movie a lot more easily. But I mean, definitely Coppola, and especially because he came up with this first in the 70s, when I think none of these movies that we're mentioning even existed.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I'm sure this movie has gone through so many iterations along the way. I think that's something we even talked about when we ran into each other after the screening. Like, this just feels like, you know, he just kept writing and just kept keeping every new idea he had. But yeah, Metropolis, though, I think it just has to be in the conversation.
Right. So, and is great. I mean, is a classic. If you haven't seen it or you think you wouldn't like a silent movie or whatever, just watch Metropolis. It's fantastic.
So I guess I'll throw in one other piece, which it's kind of a little one, but Charlie Kaufman's novel *Ant Kind*. I know Francis Ford Coppola has been reading it, although it's been more recently. I'm sure this movie was already either in post or done at the time, although it's a very long book, so maybe it took him a while. But, it is a book that's really hard to describe. Megalopolis is too. Certainly about people and how their decisions kind of affect the future, and certainly that's something that's going on with Adam Driver's character. It definitely deals with time, and that's one thing about Megalopolis that I would say is a genuine disappointment to me, is that the whole time changing thing really doesn't play in as much as it should.
Yeah, you'd think if you had the magical power to stop time, you would do more with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the changing of time and the going through time forward and backwards, like all that is a big part of Antkind, which again is a very, very complicated, weird thing to even describe that book. But like I said, I know he was actually posting on Instagram about how much he was loving it. So I definitely wanted to include it in the conversation. But yeah, just weird time stuff going on there.
Yeah, I mean, and speaking of Kaufman, I feel like Synecdoche, New York could also connect here because the whole idea there is, right, the play that just keeps being constructed and keeps being added to. And in a way, that's seemingly what Coppola may have been doing over the past like 40
In real
years
life.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, with this film.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So do you have any other pieces you want to bring up?
I have a few more if I can go through them.
Sure.
So, The Hunger Games is something that I thought of as I was watching this, which I'm sure Coppola would want you to not think of, because the
Mm.
last thing he wants is for you to connect this to some like YA adaptation that was like a big blockbuster. But honestly, the sort of the world building of this movie, like there are so many YA novels, these dystopian YA novels, that a lot of them are like, what if X thing was all the future was about? What if the future was all about personality tests? What if the future was all about plastic surgery? What if the future was all about ancient Rome? And I would
Mhm.
100% believe that there's some YA trilogy about ancient Rome being mapped on to the modern or future world or whatever. And the Hunger Games, the world there has a lot of decadence of ancient Rome kind of stuff. I mean, the Hunger Games themselves are essentially like gladiatorial combat in a dressed up way or whatever. So the fashions and that kind of stuff and the proclamations that are made, it definitely made me think of the Hunger Games. And again, whether Coppola has seen that or not, I'm sure he would think that his movie is far above that kind of stuff.
He would be happy to know that I have not seen a single Hunger Games movie. So yeah.
They're not the worst. I mean, certainly as far as that genre goes, you can do a lot worse than the Hunger Games
Sure.
movies, especially the first one is fine.
Yeah.
So a movie that I like a lot, that's another famous flop, which is Sky Captain and the World of Tomorrow, that at the time when Carrie Condon or Conran made it and was like, I'm making this whole movie on green screens, people are like, this guy is crazy. And of course, it essentially predicted the entire future of cinema.
Yeah.
And it has this steampunky aesthetic, which again is like a retro future thing, which is kind of what Coppola is going for here. And I mean, and I think it connects too. Whereas now we think of that making a whole movie on green screens as whatever is this very soulless, like Marvel Cinematic Universe cost cutting bullshit or whatever. But Sky Captain is clearly a very personal artistic vision. The guy started making it like in his basement, with proof of concept clips and stuff before he got financing to get some big stars in it. And like Megalopolis, like Coppola is not using any of these effects as like a crutch. He's using
Sure.
it to really realize the vision that he has, however crazy and incoherent it may be. And it's very personal. And I think Sky Captain has that quality. And again, it's much easier to follow and fun to watch. And I feel like it's gotten a bit of a reassessment, but I feel like it deserves more of a reassessment.
Yeah, it's coming up here on the show before, and I still have not seen Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, and I really want to. I need to watch it one of these days.
Yeah, I think you should, and I think you would like it. And I think you should watch that before watching a Neil Breen movie, because that's a much better thing to watch.
Fair. Fair.
So my final pick is sort of out there, and it is the TikTok video "Make a Vodka Sauce Pasta with Me Because I'm Grounded" by Romy Mars. And Romy Mars, the granddaughter of Francis Ford Coppola, Sofia Coppola's daughter, who appears in this film as the girl reporter from the Dingbat News or the Dingbat Times.
My favorite character in the whole movie.
Yeah. So here, I mean, there's so many Coppola family members. I think that there's like 6 Coppola family members that, in addition to Francis, that are involved in this movie in some
This
capacity.
movie would have been a smash hit if Nicolas Cage found his way into it.
It's sort of surprising that he's not in it, given that we've got Jason Schwartzman, we've got Talia Shire, we've got Romy Mars, we've got Roman Coppola behind the scenes as like a story consultant, and Robert Schwartzman's company co-distributing it. And even I was reading somewhere like the production designer at one point, Coppola fired the production designer because they didn't like understand his vision or whatever, and hired some other nephew who I never even heard of, who apparently is a production designer or maybe became a production designer to work on this movie. But you know, there's more Coppolas there. But no, I mean, not aside just from Romy Mars's appearance in this film, I mean that TikTok went viral because it was such a super distilled example of the insane privilege of her and her family. The whole point was that she was on TikTok making pasta, which was like, I think is like a TikTok trend or whatever, is basically just as a way to talk about stuff, because she was grounded for having used her father's credit card, her father of the band Phoenix, also famous rich guy, to charter a helicopter to go visit a friend of hers when she was not supposed to. So not something that any normal person would ever be grounded for. And even being on TikTok was something that she was not supposed to do. And I think her girl reporter character in this movie is sort of an extension of her. And I was actually a little disappointed that I Googled Romy Mars TikTok in order to look this up again and make sure I had it right. And now she's just on TikTok normally and reposts a bunch of TikTok videos. And she's like an actress, and she's on that show English Teacher on Hulu. And like, that's fine. But I feel like this was weirdly special because it was like the only thing that she had ever done. And she wasn't supposed to be there. And Sofia Coppola had like kept her out of the spotlight. And she was like, God damn it, I'm a star. I'm gonna be in the spotlight anyway. And that spirit she has clearly taken from her entire family tree, starting with Francis Ford Coppola.
I would love to go back and watch those things, because after seeing this character, I'm all in. I hope she does more weird stuff and doesn't just go on a more common path from here. So.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't watched English Teacher, which has gotten a lot of good reviews, but it seems like she's just playing like a high school student, and she's probably fine at it or whatever. But yeah, I hope she will do some weird stuff, and you can watch that TikTok. It's like a minute long.
I don't know how to find things on TikTok. I only know how to scroll through.
You can just look it up on the web. That's what I did.
Okay,
I don't have the
nice.
app or anything. It's very easy to do, Dave. Come on. You post things on TikTok, right?
Yeah, I know. All I do is hit the plus button. I type in my description, and I watch those plays count up. Mm-hmm. That's what I do. All right. Yeah. Talk about excess. All right. Well, I'll read down the list of puzzle pieces we got here. We talked about One from the Heart, Idiocracy, Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Fellini's Satyricon, The Bed-Sitting Room, Neil Breen's Fateful Findings, The Room and the Rocky Horror Picture Show, The Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged, Southland Tales, Jupiter Ascending, Babylon, Spring Breakers, Metropolis, Antkind, Synecdoche, New York, The Hunger Games, Sky Captain of the World of Tomorrow, and that Make a Vodka Sauce Pasta TikTok video. Just so much just random stuff here.
Yeah, everything from silent cinema to TikTok. Like that really encompasses the ambition of this movie.
Yeah, you got to give it up to him. He really brought in a lot of interesting stuff here, even if it doesn't all work out quite as well. I do want to give a shout out to Jon Voight. I think he's so good in this movie. Other than her, she's my favorite part of this.
Yeah, I mean, you watch Jon Voight in this movie and you wonder, is he good, or does he just not really know what's happening?
It's one or the other, 100%. But yeah, and I liked your mention of Aubrey Plaza. I think it was in your Letterboxd review about how like this is in that subgenre of movies where she's probably making fun of the movie she's in.
Yeah, I think that was on some other social media, but I mean, I'm sure that Aubrey Plaza in reality has great reverence for Francis Ford Coppola,
Oh, of course.
but she definitely has, going back to Parks and Recreation, that sort of like tone of like being not only playing a character who is sarcastic, but like being sarcastic in her portrayals.
Sure.
And it certainly comes out. I think I mentioned the Guy Ritchie Operation Fortune action
Mm.
movie, where it's a very different kind of, it's like a very like glossy action movie. And you can imagine her being like, yeah, let's go get the bad guy. That's a good idea,
Yeah.
and you don't know if that's her, or that's the character. And my thing that I feel like I bring up often was just the Grumpy Cat movie, the Grumpy Cat Christmas movie, where she does the voice of Grumpy Cat, and just the way she says like meow, meow, is
Meow.
just fantastic in that movie. I feel
She's
like that
great.
movie should be a cult classic, and it's not.
I wish somebody had filmed when she first got the script from Francis Ford Coppola and saw that her character's name is Wow Platinum. She must have just flipped. Like, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, and she's talked about, I think she did like an audition over Zoom when she was filming some other movie, and it was like Coppola was on the way to the Oscars, and so she was auditioning for him right then, and he had her do like these theater games or something. I mean, it sounds crazy, but she talks about it in, again, a very reverent way, and I'm sure she's not really trying to make fun of it, but
Sure.
it's
Sure.
just the way she performs.
Absolutely. Any other closing thoughts before we wrap this one up?
No, I mean, like you said, I don't like this movie, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it just to an average person or whatever, but I do appreciate that it exists. And I think if you're fascinated, especially by any of the boondoggles that we mentioned, if you're fascinated by Southland Tales or Babylon or Neil Breen, that kind of stuff, you do want to see this.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree. Josh, is there another movie you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, I was wondering. I've been trying to, catch up on some notable movies from this year, and I had a few ones that I thought of, but I'm going to recommend one that's kind of more under the radar. That's like the opposite of this. Is a very, very, very small scale movie, but it does take place in New York. It's
Mm,
called "The Feeling That the Time for Doing Something Has Passed," from Joanna Arnow, who is the writer, director, and star of it, and it's gotten a lot of comparisons to Lena Dunham, which I guess is fair, but I feel like it's doing a bit of its own thing. And it's very much, I mean, like Lena Dunham, she's playing this character who's kind of a disaffected, she's a little older, she's in her mid 30s, but she lives in New York, she's single, she has a crappy dead end job, she doesn't really know what to do with her life. And she's in all of these sort of useless relationships, but they're all these BDSM relationships. So it's
mm.
incredibly sexually explicit, but not in a conventional way. And just applying that deadpan sense of humor to like, yes, master, I will do what you say. And like not making fun of that kind of relationship, but showing how that can be just as mundane as like a more
Hmm.
conventional relationship. I just thought it was really well done. And it's very detached, but I thought it was very funny. And it's definitely the kind of movie that if you watch like 2 minutes of it and you're like, fuck this, you will not like it. But
Yeah, yeah.
if you are amused within those first couple minutes, it will definitely be for you. I watched this other movie recently from a long time earlier that was sort of a parody of mumblecore type things, and it has a fake trailer. And the fake critic quote is like, "This director is the voice of people who like movies like this." And it's meant to be derogatory, but I feel like you could apply that to Joanna Arnow and this movie in a positive way.
That's great. I love that. I'm gonna have to check that out. It sounds really good.
It's on Hulu right now. Yeah.
Right on, right on. Well, Josh, tell people where they can find you, awesome movie year, everything you're up to.
You can find some old things from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. You can find me at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on X, Twitter, and on Blue Sky, and on Letterboxd. And if you're in Vegas, you can check me out on the KTNV News every Friday at 11 a.m. You can check out Awesome Movie Year at awesomemovieyear.com, at Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, and Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. And yeah, we are get us wherever you listen to podcasts. And I think we're in our season on the films of 1969 when this comes out. That's
I think
probably
so.
what it'll be.
Yeah,
So
that seems right.
we're getting toward the end of that one. We've got an audience choice episode coming up on a big musical. So curious to see what the audience picks for that. And we always appreciate all the feedback from the Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces group when we do those polls and everything else. And so check out Awesome Movie Year.
Random last minute prediction. We could look back at this a few years from now and see if you were right. What do you think will be the first good Francis Ford Coppola movie that we cover on Awesome Movie Year?
The first good one? I mean, it depends on, what we pick year-wise, but I mean, probably one of the Godfather movies, because then they both win Best Picture, and we're always covering Best Picture, so I would
That's true.
guess it'll be one of those.
Yeah, that's a fair guess. Right
Yeah.
on. Well, Josh, thanks so much for doing the show, and I look forward to getting you back again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Megalopolis. Thank you to Josh Bell for joining me on that one, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you're enjoying piecing it together, make sure you are subscribed. Also, you could drop us a 5-star rating and review while you're at it. That helps make sure that more people check out the show. Also, if you thought of any puzzle pieces for Megalopolis or for any of the other movies we've covered on the show recently, send them in. I love hearing from listeners. Send your puzzle pieces in. I will read them on the next trailers episode. Always love hearing from you guys, so get in touch. You can also follow me on social media at PiecingPod and join the Facebook group Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. Also, we have a Patreon, the Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. Lots of great stuff over there. It's patreon.com/bydavidrosen. For as little as $3 a month, you get access to all of the bonus content. So, hey, if you want to support the show, I really appreciate you being out there listening, but you could also sign up for the Patreon, and that is very much appreciated. So I always close these episodes out with a piece of music, and I was trying to think of something, with the grandeur of Caesar, the Adam Driver character in Megalopolis. And I remembered this track. I don't think I've ever played this before. It's from Further Into the Dark, which was the first of these free bonus albums I put out on my Bandcamp exclusively between my first 3 albums. I release an album, put out a bonus. Release an album, put out a bonus. This was from the first of those 3, Further Into the Dark, and it's called The New World, and it's a pretty big, heavy, epic track. I remember I was going to put it on the first album, but there was another song that kind of had a similar vibe, and I didn't want 2 songs with the exact kind of vibe to them, so that's why I kept it off that first official album. But this song is pretty damn cool. So this is The New World, available exclusively on my Bandcamp, davidrosen.bandcamp.com. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.